Gaza faces a deepening humanitarian catastrophe, with hospitals nearing collapse, soaring casualties, and tens of thousands of malnourished children amid an ongoing Israeli blockade. Meanwhile, tensions rise in the region as Iran distances itself from nuclear negotiations with the United States. And reports reveal covert coordination between Israel and a dismissed U.S. official on Tehran. Our special coverage here on Qnews unpacks these critical developments. At least 40 Palestinians have been killed and 125 were injured in the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours. Local health authorities report that the total Palestinian death toll since October 2023 is women and children. Since Israel resumed its offensive on March 18, following a 2-month truce, 2,436 people have been killed and 6,450 wounded. Rescue efforts remain severely hindered as emergency crews struggle to reach victims due to ongoing strikes targeting ambulances and civil defense workers. Many casualties remain under the rubble or in inaccessible areas. Gaza's health ministry has issued an urgent appeal for fuel, warning that hospitals are on the brink of running out. While some fuel is stored at designated sites, the ministry says aid groups are unable to access or transport it because Israel has declared those areas off limits. If no new fuel arrives, hospitals will run out within 3 days and may be forced to shut down, the ministry added. The World Health Organization has warned that Gaza's healthcare system is nearing total collapse, describing the humanitarian health situation as catastrophic after nearly 2 months without medical aid due to Israel's ongoing blockade. World Health Organization spokesperson Margaret Harris said Gaza's residents are deprived of essentials like food, water, shelter, and medical care, and fear of hospital attacks has kept many from seeking treatment. Hospitals face severe shortages of basic supplies, with overcrowded conditions and a surge in trauma injuries and disease exacerbating the crisis. Despite having stocked warehouses and teams on the ground, World Health Organization says the continuing blockade is preventing the delivery of life-saving aid. Harris warned that the situation is very close to the edge of the abyss. Gaza's government media office has reported that over 70,000 children are currently hospitalized due to severe malnutrition, as Israel continues to block the entry of essential aid, including baby formula and nutritional supplements. According to the statement, more than 3,500 children under 5 are at risk of imminent death from starvation, with 290,000 others on the brink of death. It also highlighted that 1.1 million children in Gaza are lacking the minimum nutrition required for survival. The statement condemned the blockade, accusing Israel of using starvation as a weapon while calling attention to the shameful international silence surrounding the crisis. And for further analysis, we're joined from Ramallah by the writer and researcher Ahmed Zakarna. Mr. Ahmed, welcome to Qnews. And first off, reference to Israel planning to expand its military operations on Gaza. What are the strategic objectives behind Israel's continued military actions in Gaza?
Good afternoon to you and to the dear viewers. Of course, the main objective that is now very evident is targeting the Palestinian population and trying to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian population by using starvation as a weapon, and one time by military bombing and evacuations. Reaching the idea of ethnic cleansing and also reaching to extend this war to an endless war until the Palestinian cause is completely liquefied. And this is the Netanyahu desire not only for the Gaza Strip but also for the West Bank, and consequently Netanyahu and the far right Israeli government think that it is high time to end the Palestinian cause completely once and for all, and therefore he's trying to fix or address the demographic conflict by getting rid of the Palestinian population, or as much as possible of this population, which goes side by side in the Smotrich theory stated a few years ago, that saying that evacuation, displacement, or the dislocation of the population, or killing the population and having the Palestinian population living as slaves inside their homelands. And this is the Israeli desire to have less than 50% of Palestinians compared to the Jewish population on the Palestinian lands.
Now, sir, according to Israeli media reports, Israel has called on tens of thousands of reserve soldiers in preparation for the assault on Gaza. However, these soldiers informed their commanders about their intention to refuse this expansion. How do you interpret this and the impact of the continuity of this process?
It's true that there is a major military ability in the Israeli hands, and therefore they are practicing these operations on the Gaza Strip. But we cannot forget that the internal public Israeli opinion have a lot of divisions, starting regarding the Netanyahu government and the composition of the government in general, and with the Netanyahu personality in particular. Netanyahu has worked for a very long time on changing the identity of the Israeli state and shifting the Israeli community into all types of extremism and brutality, which created a lot of divisions and disagreements inside the internal Israeli public opinion. These divisions will negatively impact the course of the war and the related decisions, as well as the outcomes of the war, because not all of his desires will be reached eventually. Of course, Netanyahu and the far right government have the intention to liquidate this cause, but the divisions inside Israel and the people who have lost hope and who have lost their diversity ideologically and intellectually will have negative impact, because this extremism and radicalism practiced by the settlers in particular, which is being armed by Smotrich with tens of thousands of weapons, these radicalism will extend to the Israeli inside. And this is what's going on now regarding the Israeli internal divisions, especially that the families of the detainees and a large number of the Israeli public now think that this is a political war for personal reasons, serving only the Prime Minister Netanyahu, and not the Jewish state. And let's be reminded of the latest statements of the defense minister and the Biden administration, that Israel was defeated strategically, and this will impact on the identity of the Israeli state and its existence. Several
Yes, sir.
estimates.
Allow me to interrupt you here, because I would like to assess the political aspect. And building on what you said, with the Israeli government facing mounting pressure from the detainees, the families of the detainees, What are the key political goals Israel hopes to achieve with its expanded operations in Gaza then?
First of all, it's an attempt to survive, for Netanyahu to survive and to retain his position as prime minister. Also, the far right officials, for the first time, are assuming as much positions, and they are controlling the Israeli decision. These people, on top of whom Netanyahu wants the war to continue to stay, to remain in office, and consequently they are pushing for this direction. And adding to this, Netanyahu has internal corruption lawsuits, and he is also being persecuted internationally, given the arrest warrants issued by the ICJ, and also in Europe. Now he's facing a lot of criticism, so deterioration and economic instability are now reasons calling for Netanyahu, who's fearing prison and trial in Israeli courts. He does not want to end this war, and he only wants to favor his own personal interests on the account of the Palestinian people, the Lebanese people, and lately on the Syrian people as well. And he's trying to lure the United States to launch a military strike on Iran. All of these objectives that we're talking about only serve a personal agenda for the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's now being criticized broadly, even inside Israel, in the Israeli media, by his counterparts and by the families of the detainees, who are now practicing a lot of pressure to strike a deal to end the war and bring back the detainees.
Now, taking a closer look on the civilian casualties given the escalating death toll in Gaza, I have to ask you, what actions might the international community take to address the worsening humanitarian crisis and the potential violations of international law?
Of course, the international law violations has reached an unprecedented level in history, in modern history at the very least. And that's why the international system is now being tested in a very critical phase, which is very well known to the international organizations, on top of which the United Nations and the humanitarian and relief organizations and some of the Western states, who should now be ashamed of this volume of brutality and genocide witnessed in the Palestinian territories, and using the weapon of starvation. And this triggered Britain, France, and Germany to call for an unhindered humanitarian aid access without any conditions from the Israeli government. On the other side, the Arab group led by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other Arab states active in the Palestinian cause are now leading the international alliance in partnership with France. This kind of pressure and this mobilization will bring all the parties to the state-state solution and to the negotiation table and to the political course, which is Netanyahu trying to avoid for personal reasons. The international system has only one thing to resort to the Security Council, in accordance to the item 6, to have an executive power for the Security Council resolutions to be executed on the grounds, and also the international community shall practice some pressure on the United States in order to urge Israel to stop the war.
Yes, Sarah, your point is clear. Sorry for cutting in due to the shortage of time. From Ramallah, that was the writer and researcher Ahmed Zakarna. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. And in Iran, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has said that his country will not tie its future to nuclear negotiations with the United States. According to Iranian media, President Pezeshkian said that Iran is prepared to continue independently if nuclear talks with Washington become complicated, emphasizing the country's reliance on internal unity. In previous statements, he noted that domestic affairs are not dependent on the outcome of negotiations, though he expressed confidence that a peaceful resolution could lead to significant progress. He also stressed that the absence of an agreement would not necessarily result in difficulties for Iran. Israeli newspaper has confirmed the accuracy of a Washington Post report regarding coordination between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the dismissed U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz concerning the Iranian file. Washington Post had quoted two sources stating that Waltz angered President Donald Trump as the U.S. National Security Advisor appeared to adopt Netanyahu's belief that the time had come to launch a military strike against Iran. It added that officials in the Trump administration considered that Waltz was trying to tip the balance towards military action and that he was working in close coordination with the Israelis.
The hostages are in agony, and we want to get them all out. Steve Witkoff, who's President Trump's very able representative, helped us get a deal that got 25 out. We're working now on another.
And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Al-Ahram Managing Editor Muhammad Azzuddin. Mr. Muhammad, pleasure to have you in this special coverage. And first off, in what ways might Iran's insistence on its enrichment rights influence future nuclear negotiations or trigger regional security escalations?
Thank you so much for having me on Qnews. Of course, Iran's persistence to have the right to a nuclear program, saying that it's a peaceful or civil program, in addition to its right to enrich uranium, is a desire to not submit to the U.S. conditions and terms. The U.S. agreements that the U.S. wants to strike as soon as possible is the only hope for the United States, and there are also aspirations on the Israeli side to fail these attempts in order to launch a military escalation, whether by the United States or with the help of Israel against nuclear facilities and especially the missile manufacturing facilities. The Iranian desire for the negotiations to be always related to the nuclear program and anyway beyond producing the nuclear bomb, without talking about the missile programs or the broad range missiles, is a desire to prolong the negotiations and also to impose its own conditions, or what it sees as U.S. conditions to lift the sanctions.
Now, tackling the diplomatic perspective, what are the potential diplomatic consequences of Iran publicly asserting its right to enrich uranium while dismissing U.S. concerns?
This Iranian will is to prove its stance, and it cannot be a challenge to the United States, and therefore it cannot be considered as an escalation that would actually trigger the United States to launch a military operation against the Iranian facilities. What Iran talking about is some kind of diplomacy during the talks regarding the U.S. conditions or demands, or they are setting barriers or terms to face the U.S. aspirations to dismantle the Iranian nuclear program. Iran does not want to repeat the Libyan experiment in 2003 to completely give up any potential for a nuclear program or a missile program. What Iran wants is to have a nuclear program, to allegedly peaceful, and also to have the right to enrich uranium with under some levels. This is for the United States and of course for Israel as well. They see it as an attempt to hide the real abilities of the Iranian nuclear program, and that Iran might be at any point of time without a pressure will be able to produce a nuclear bomb which will change the entire equation.
Now, sir, regarding Trump's ousted security advisor Walt's alleged coordination with Netanyahu on an Iran strike, how might this reflect deeper divisions within the U.S. foreign policy circles regarding Iran?
Of course, that is now publicly known. Changing the national security coordinator because he had similar views to Israel regarding launching a military strike and luring the U.S. to this strike, and therefore escalating the situation in the Gulf region, which is something Israel itself is not prepared to, and therefore the United States president decided to give the job to his foreign minister Rubio. This uncovers the divisions inside the U.S. administration to end the nuclear program of Iran. The United States wanted to have, does not want to have nuclear power inside the Middle East other than beyond Israel, and they also want to practice maximum pressure to reassure its allies in the Gulf region that they will not be exposed to any sort of tensions in the event that there is a military strike will be directed to Iran. It's here regarding the priorities of the American foreign policy, and therefore the U.S. president, in spite of his statements that some might see as radical or tend to the right wing or threatening to other states' affairs, he does not want to get into a conflict that to uncalculated conflict, especially with a country that owns ballistic missiles. We have seen a ballistic missile being launched by the Houthi group today with a non-advanced technologies, and the failure of the Israeli air defense to intercept it as it hit the Ben Gurion airport. This means that the party that provided support to the Houthi is Iran. They have advanced abilities, and getting into a military confrontation will not be accepted and or allowed even for Israel to take over, even with the consultation with the United States, at least at the current time.
Building on what you said, how could this unauthorized military coordination between U.S. officials and foreign governments affect trust within the U.S. national security establishment?
It is very complicated. The United States has always been a state of institutions, but the current U.S. administration is now going beyond the traditional foreign policy of the United States. Even in terms of statements, there has been commitment before regarding the military operations or the foreign policy, but threatening publicly with forcing sanctions and the executive orders regarding military or trade wars or economic affairs makes the international community more agitated and more suspicious regarding and they have their own suspicions regarding the U.S. intentions, especially in a region such as the Middle East, where the world power have interests, and the major powers in the region have alliances with different states from around the world economically, and this is in addition to threatening the energy security in the world. The allies, the international community, and the European Union must reconsider their policies and their moves, and even their statements regarding the US foreign policy, and coordinating with the different states, which have declined and is now in its lowest point.
From Cairo, that was Al Ahram Managing Editor Mohammed Azzuddin. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News and for all the information you provided us with. Gaza's crisis deepens with collapsing hospitals and child malnutrition under blockade. Tensions rise as Iran exits U.S. nuclear talks amid secret Israel-U.S. coordination. And this concludes our special coverage for tonight. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.